moving on to the next section, the intellectual currents. Intellectually, sport and education in the Moray Firth mirror in many ways the national and international dialogues and expressions of King James VI and I. King James, long prior to his ascension to the English throne, wanted to centralize his power, reigning in the remote areas of his Kingdom of Scotland, later Kingdoms of Scotland and Ireland, by a process that would strip the peripheral Highland lords of their subversive independence and incorporate them into lowland civil courtly culture. Most historians addressing King James's centralizing policies focus on the Western Highlands and Islands. However, components of his agenda to improve and to civilize Scottish society can be seen elsewhere, such as the Beauly to Wick stretch of the Moray Firth. This connection is most apparent when examining the works of King James, Sir Robert Gordon of Gordonston, and Sir Thomas Urquhart of Cromarty. So here is an image of King James. The Basilican Doran was a treaty written by King James VI in 1599 as an instruction manual for his son, Prince Henry, his eldest son and heir. It addressed three matters: Henry's duty to God as a Christian, his duty as rightful heir and king, and how to behave. The final matter has received little academic attention, but it provides a wealth of information about early modern courtly behavior. Henry was instructed on all necessary things such as eating, sleeping, speaking, writing, and gesturing, as well as on unnecessary but convenient things, including the appropriate pastimes and recreation for him and his companions. Henry was taught to behave properly for a man of his station, staving off all types of vice, such as extravagance, gluttony, and drunkenness. Also, he was to be vigilant of everything that he did or said in public, as it was open to the realm, and to avoid awkward situations, he was to speak plainly, stifle his anger, and avoid hasty decisions. King James believed that exercise was critical to the success of his heir, because it was expedient for health, improved his ability, and strengthened his body. Henry was cautioned that exercise was to improve his ability for office, not distract from his office. Evidence suggests, however, that Henry ignored much of his father's warnings and was known to be a sports fanatic, playing tennis for hours and hours at a time. King James wrote, "I debar all rough and violent exercise, as the football meter for the laming, then making able the users thereof, as likewise tumbling tricks only serve for balladins and comedians, to win their bread with, but exercises that I would have you use, although but moderately, not making a craft of them, are running, leaping, wrestling, fencing, dancing, playing at the catch or tennis, archery, pall-mall, and such like fair and pleasant field games." Moreover, Henry was to become a great horseman, like his father, skilled at tilting and accustomed to using a sword on horseback, all perceived regal talents. This passage that I just read out to you demonstrates the evident hierarchy and prestige associated with different types of activities. While Henry could practice his wrestling, fencing, and horsemanship, all activities where he could possibly be injured and were indeed a preparation for war, he could not play rough and violent games. Football and tumbling were out of the question. Therefore, it was not the possibility of injury that warranted the king's disdain for certain exercises, but it was their association with the lower levels of society. King James believed that sport was a critical component to his son's education. His athletic ability was vital to his leadership, along with being a good Christian king. This intellectual current in the Basilican Doran reverberated throughout the country. However, sport, as part of education, was not just for the royalty, but was for the betterment of society and was thought to facilitate civility. Here's the next man that I'm going to be talking about. Robert Gordon, 1580 to 1656, was the fourth son of the 11th Earl of Sutherland. He was educated in Dornoch by the schoolmaster William Pape before leaving for St. Andrews in Edinburgh, then continuing his education on the continent. In 1606, he was at the court of King James VI and I, and was subsequently admitted to the gentlemen of the bedchamber and was knighted. These influential positions gave him direct access to King James, and this is where he started his long political career. one where he was associated with the court, but also remaining very loyal and connected to his family, pushing his family's pursuits, and also becoming the tutor to the 13th Earl and family historian. After the death of his brother, the 12th Earl of Sutherland, in 1615, Gordon became the tutor to his 6-year-old nephew, John. He set John's affairs in order and sent him to school in Dornoch. During these school days, we find the first references known to date of golf being played in the town. Gordon's tutor account book recorded, item £10 given this year for bows, arrows, golf clubs, and balls, with other necessaries for his lordship's exercise. Gordon believed, as a sportsman himself, winning a silver arrow in Edinburgh during the King's visit in 1617, that sport was a critical component of education. Here's a shot that some of us will be familiar with. This is the links along the championship course here in town. In 1620, Sir Robert penned a letter of advice to his nephew. He wanted the Earl to become a successful leader, a calculated but kind master, a learned man, and someone respected throughout the land. The advice covered disparate topics, from the vice of man, how to select a proper wife, how to administer his estate effectively, in addition to instructing John on the themes of sport, education, and civility. These themes discussed in the letter were strikingly similar to the Basilican Doran, keeping in mind that the King and Sir Robert were quite close. Further evidence of this letter is further evidence of Gordon's connection with the King. John was urged to cherish her countrymen and train them up in all types of honest exercise, such as hunting, riding, archery, shooting with the gun, golfing, jumping, running, swimming, and such like. Sport in this region then was not just an elite preserve, but was open to all the Earl's countrymen. Gordon solidified Dornoch's reputation for sport when he stated in 1630, "About this town are the fairest and largest links of any part of Scotland, fit for archery, golfing, riding, and all other exercise, and they do surpass the fields of Montrose or St. Andrews." Gordon, like King James, detested football. It was a dangerous and unprofitable exercise. The chastisement of football was probably because it was notoriously riotous, causing great disruption and damage in communities. Gordon's low opinion of this sport also seems to be aimed at his family's rivals, the Sinclairs of Caithness, over a barbaric episode at a match that happened in the late 16th century. George, the 5th Earl of Caithness, killed 2 of his kinsmen at a wedding feast, David and Ingram Sinclair, in cold blood. A football match began after the feast, and without warning, the Earl got up and shot Ingram in the head with his pistol, then slew David with his sword. Neither men were armed. Gordon suspected that these men were slain because Sinclair thought them to be supporters of Sutherland. For Gordon, this act of depravity would have been further impetus to spread civility throughout the land, especially in the northern earldoms of Scotland. Okay, just keep this in mind. This is an excerpt from an act from King James while I read this next section. The letter also expressed a strategy to improve Sutherland as part of a national dialogue. Gordon's ideas on the importance of English language education, literacy, on ideas of civility, sport, and how to bring up young men, noble and commoner, for the good and cohesion of the realm were influential at the highest level. To transform Sutherland, their role was to plant English language schools throughout the lands, with his chief institution being in Dornoch. Moreover, he was to build a library in Dornoch to amend the ignorance that increases through the lack of books. These developments were to take away the relics of Irish barbarity, which yet remain in this country, to wit, the Irish language and habits. The Earl was then instructed that if the people of Sutherland continued to wear uncivil clothes such as plaids, mantles, trews, and blue bonnets, he was to act severely against them. Judging by his later character, John internalized much of his uncle's advice. He continued to support sport and education and bestowed these values upon his sons. He continued the tradition of Sutherland men playing bowls, golf, and tennis, being well-read and educated, as is evident in the travel expenses of the two boys traveling to London in 1654 to 1656. The document is a very detailed account of the money, their father's money that they were spending, from drinking money to losing money playing bowls to buying golf clubs, books, expenses for learning to dance, to paying fencing masters, and it goes on and on. Very detailed. It's a brilliant document. The degree to which the Sutherland men, however, were brought into this English-speaking literate culture continues to be debatable. But nevertheless, by the 1620s, there was a plan drawn to propagate civility, education, and sport in Sutherland. Moving on to the next man, Sir Thomas Urquhart of Cromarty. He was born in 1611, died 1660. Known for his eccentric personality, his superfluous vocabulary, and his complex mathematical theorems, he wrote, among many things, the Logopendexesian, or an introduction to the universal language, published in 1653. The last book of the six-part collection, The Furtherance of Industry, discussed the development strategy for boroughs to ensure prosperity and growth. For Urquhart, Cromarty on the Black Isle was his main concern. He commented on the over-reliance of moneylenders within the borough, which was rather ironic because his father had amassed a massive debt which he was continuously chased around the country for, finally finding some refuge in the Netherlands. He also commented on merchant organization, sea trade, and both the support of the arts and the sciences. Similarly to King James and Sir Robert, Urquhart believed that sport and education were combined, and he thought these two things could bring civility and honor to a people who had little. His plan was to create a sophisticated educational institution. He wrote, "By virtue thereof, the professors of all sciences, liberal arts active and factive, mechanic trades, and whatever concerns either virtue or learning, practical or theoretic, had been cherished. Such an institution would have far surpassed anything in the North." Urquhart included physical education as the second component of his curriculum. He wrote, "I had also procured the residence of men of prime faculties for bodily exercise, such as riding, fencing, military feats, of mustering, embattling, handling of the pike and musket, the art of gunnery, fortifications, or anything that belong in the wars, either for the defense or assault, vaulting, swimming, running, leaping, throwing of the bar, playing of tennis, singing, fingering of all manner of musical instruments, hawking, hunting, fowling, angling, shooting, and whatever else may conduce to the accomplishment of either the body of the mind, enriching the men in their fortunes, or promoving them to deserved honors." Urquhart's impressive initiative reflects his passion for education and sport, and his model school reflects that of a contemporary university. This combination of sport and education was happening throughout the north of Scotland, but it was also a wider European trend with things happening on the continent, where universities were trying to attract sports masters so they could promote their school for the nobles to send their sons where they could learn to be the best fencers, dancers, tennis players, things like that. The creation of such an institution would have dramatically improved the infrastructure in the north, stimulating growth and prosperity, while also retaining many intellectuals in this region, as people flooded to Aberdeen from here if they wanted to go to university. It was not a stretch of the imagination that tensions would have existed between Gordon and Urquhart as to where this institution was to be located. And these three writers, then, believed that sports, whether martial or recreational, were part of civilized lowland culture, demonstrating that sport functions on an intellectual level in the Moray Firth, congruently with the king. Sport was a vital component of education, leadership, and was influential in the development of the country.